Let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed how certain people carry themselves differently? There is something in their eyes, something in the way they speak, something in how they move through the world. These people have known suffering, not ordinary difficulties, but the kind of suffering that changes a person forever. I have spent my life studying the human mind and soul. In my work as a psychiatrist and through my own personal struggles, I have come to understand that suffering is not merely something to be avoided. It is something that shapes us, transforms us. The question is not whether we will suffer, but what we will become because of it. When we look at people who have suffered greatly, we see certain patterns emerge. These are not pathologies to be cured. They are adaptations, ways the psyche protects itself, ways the soul tries to make meaning from pain. Understanding these patterns helps us understand ourselves and each other. Today we will examine 5 common behaviors of people who have suffered too much in life. You might recognize yourself in some of these patterns. You might recognize someone you love. This recognition is the first step toward transformation. The suffering that changes us comes in many forms. It may be childhood trauma, loss of loved ones, serious illness, violence or betrayal. The specifics matter less than how these experiences affect our fundamental understanding of ourselves and the world. We are talking about suffering that alters one's basic sense of safety, trust, and meaning. I must emphasize that these behaviors are not character flaws. They are survival mechanisms that once served an important purpose. The psyche does not develop these patterns by accident. They emerge as a way to protect the self when normal protections have failed. Our task is not to judge these behaviors or to hastily discard them. Our task is to understand them, to see their original purpose, and then to decide consciously whether they still serve us well in our present life. People who have suffered too much often develop an extreme form of self-reliance. They trust only themselves. They ask for help rarely, if ever. They pride themselves on their independence. I can handle this alone becomes not just a statement, but an entire philosophy of life. This behavior has deep roots in the psyche. When people have called for help and no one came, when they depended on others who failed them, the mind draws an understandable conclusion. I must depend only on myself. This conclusion feels like wisdom, like a hard-won truth about how the world works. I recall a patient, a woman in her 40s, who managed everything in her life with meticulous control. She raised her children, advanced in her career, maintained her home, all with remarkable independence. She came to me not because she recognized her excessive self-reliance as a problem, but because she had begun to experience anxiety attacks that she could not control. As we worked together, she revealed a childhood marked by neglect. Her mother, struggling with alcoholism, was unreliable and often emotionally absent. Her father worked long hours and had little involvement in her care. She learned early that her needs would not be met by others. She adapted by becoming fiercely independent. This adaptation served her well in many ways. She developed impressive competence and resilience. But as an adult, this same pattern created isolation. She found it nearly impossible to allow others to support her. The idea of vulnerability produced such anxiety that her body began to rebel with panic attacks. The path toward balance for those with excessive self-reliance starts with a simple truth. Interdependence is not weakness. Humans are social creatures. We are not meant to move through life entirely alone. Independence is valuable, but so is the ability to connect, to receive, to allow others to contribute to our well-being. For those who recognize this pattern in themselves, I suggest starting small. Ask for help with something minor, something that poses little risk. Notice the discomfort this produces, but do not let it dictate your actions. The discomfort is simply the old pattern asserting itself. With practice, with gradual expansion of your comfort zone, you can develop new neural pathways, new habits of mind. Remember that extreme self-reliance often masks a deep longing for connection. The persona of the completely autonomous individual usually conceals its opposite. The desire to be seen, to be known, to be supported by others. The second behavior common among those who have suffered greatly is emotional guardedness. These individuals maintain careful control over their emotional expression. They rarely cry in front of others. They may appear calm, even in situations that would provoke strong emotions in most people. They keep others at a safe emotional distance. This pattern develops when emotional vulnerability has led to pain. Perhaps emotions were used against them. Perhaps they were ridiculed for showing feelings. Perhaps they grew up in an environment where emotions were overwhelming and uncontained. Whatever the specific cause, they learned that emotional guardedness offered protection. I think of a man I worked with some years ago, a successful attorney known for his cool rationality. In our sessions, he spoke of his life in terms of facts and logical analysis. When I asked about his feelings, he would redirect the conversation to his thoughts about the situation. He was not unfriendly, but he maintained a subtle barrier that kept others from seeing his emotional life. As our work progressed, he shared memories of growing up with a father who had unpredictable rage. The household could shift from calm to chaos in an instant if his father became angry. My patient had learned to suppress his own emotions as a way to avoid triggering his father's outbursts. Over time, this suppression became so habitual that he lost touch with his emotional life altogether. For those who recognize this pattern of emotional guardedness in themselves, the path toward balance involves gradually reconnecting with emotions in a safe context. This does not mean forcing emotional expression or manufacturing feelings that are not there. It means creating space for emotions to arise naturally, acknowledging them without judgment, and gradually becoming more comfortable with their presence. Emotions are neither good nor bad in themselves. They are signals, information from our deeper selves about what matters to us, what threatens us, what nourishes us. When we cut ourselves off from this information, we may function effectively on one level, but we lose access to an important dimension of human experience. The integration of emotional life happens slowly through small acts of courage. It might begin with simply naming emotions to yourself when they arise. I am feeling sad now. This is anger. I notice anxiety. This simple act of naming creates a small space between yourself and the emotion. You are not consumed by the feeling, you are observing it. The third behavior characteristic of those who have suffered greatly is a heightened sensitivity to injustice. These individuals have a finely tuned radar for unfairness, for the abuse of power, for situations where the strong take advantage of the weak. This sensitivity develops naturally in those who have experienced injustice themselves. Having been on the receiving end of unfair treatment, they recognize its signs immediately. Their bodies react to these situations with the same vigilance they developed during their own suffering. I remember a teacher I worked with, a woman deeply committed to her students. She had an almost uncanny ability to identify children who were being mistreated or neglected. She would notice subtle changes in behavior that others missed. She advocated fiercely for these vulnerable students, sometimes creating tension with colleagues who did not share her concerns. In our work together, she revealed her own history of childhood abuse. Her heightened sensitivity was directly connected to her personal experience of injustice. What appeared to others as overreaction was actually a finely calibrated instrument developed through her own suffering. This sensitivity to injustice can be a tremendous gift. It often leads to vocations in helping professions, to advocacy work, to a lifelong commitment to protecting the vulnerable, but it can also create challenges. It can make ordinary interactions feel threatening. It can lead to seeing malevolence where none exists. It can exhaust the individual who feels constantly triggered by the injustices they perceive all around them. For those who recognize this pattern in themselves, the path toward balance involves developing discernment. Not every uncomfortable situation involves injustice. Not every disagreement includes an abuse of power. Learning to pause and evaluate situations before reacting can prevent unnecessary suffering. This does not mean doubting your perceptions or ignoring your sensitivity. It means acknowledging that this sensitivity, while often accurate, can sometimes be triggered by situations that merely resemble past injustices rather than repeating them. We are so the integration of this sensitivity happens when we can use our awareness of injustice selectively, directing our energy towards situations where our intervention will make a meaningful difference. We learn to ask, is this a battle worth fighting? Is this where my energy will do the most good? The fourth behavior common among those who have suffered too much is a difficulty accepting good fortune. When positive things happen, these individuals often wait for the other shoe to drop. They have trouble fully enjoying success, love, or happiness when it comes their way. They may sabotage positive situations or push away people who treat them well. This pattern develops when suffering has been prolonged or unpredictable. The psyche adapts by maintaining vigilance, by refusing to lower its guard even when current circumstances appear favorable. This vigilance once served a protective function, preventing the pain of disappointed expectations. Think of a talented artist I worked with, a woman whose work had begun to receive significant recognition, and rather than experiencing pleasure in this success, she found herself increasingly anxious. She began to miss deadlines. She picked fights with gallery owners who supported her work. She considered abandoning art altogether. As we explored this pattern, she remembered the chaotic household of her childhood, where moments of happiness were invariably followed by devastating disappointments. Her alcoholic parents would have periods of sobriety and normalcy that gave her hope, only to relapse into destructive behavior. She had learned that hope was dangerous, that lowering her guard led to pain. For those who recognize this difficulty accepting good fortune, the path toward balance begins with awareness. Notice how you respond when positive things happen. Do you immediately think of what might go wrong? Do you find reasons to discount your success? Do you feel unworthy of good treatment from others? Once you recognize these patterns, you can begin to challenge them gently. This does not mean forcing yourself to feel happy or grateful when you don't. It means creating space for positive experiences alongside your habitual vigilance. Try this simple practice. When something good happens, pause and say to yourself, "This is a good moment. I will allow myself to experience it fully, knowing that whatever comes next, this moment itself is real." The fifth behavior characteristic of those who have suffered greatly is chronic meaning-making. These individuals work tirelessly to extract significance from their painful experiences. They analyze, interpret, and reframe their suffering, often developing complex philosophical or spiritual frameworks to explain why they have endured what they have. This behavior develops as a way to make suffering bearable. Random suffering feels intolerable to the human mind. We need to believe that our pain serves some purpose, that it fits into some larger pattern or plan. I recall a man I worked with who had survived a serious car accident that killed his wife. In the years following this tragedy, he developed an elaborate spiritual framework explaining why this had happened and how it fit into a divine plan. He wrote books about his insights. He gave lectures. His meaning-making was sophisticated and thoughtful. Yet beneath this impressive intellectual structure, his grief remained largely unprocessed. His chronic meaning-making served as a defense against simply feeling the devastating loss he had experienced. For those who recognize this pattern of chronic meaning-making in themselves, the path toward balance involves making room for mystery alongside meaning. Some experiences resist our efforts to explain them fully. Some suffering cannot be neatly incorporated into a coherent. This does not mean abandoning the search for meaning, which is a fundamental human need. It means recognizing the limits of our understanding, allowing for ambiguity, for questions without answers. Try this practice. When you find yourself spinning elaborate explanation for your suffering, gently redirect your attention to the simple facts of your experience. This happened. It caused pain. The pain continues to affect me. Sometimes this simple acknowledgement is more healing than the most sophisticated interpretation. As we consider these 5 behaviors together, excessive self-reliance, emotional guardedness, heightened sensitivity to injustice, difficulty accepting good fortune, and chronic meaning-making, a larger pattern emerges. Each represents a way the psyche attempts to protect itself when normal protections have failed. Each serves an important purpose. During times of suffering, the challenge we face is not to eliminate these patterns, but to integrate them. Integration means acknowledging their original purpose, while recognizing that we are no longer in the situations that made them necessary. It means developing flexibility, the ability to engage these behaviors when they serve us, and to set them aside when they don't. This process of integration is what I have called individuation. Individuation is not about achieving some ideal state of psychological perfection. It is about becoming more fully who you are, including the aspects of yourself shaped by suffering. The path of individuation requires tremendous courage. It asks us to look squarely at patterns we have developed over many years. It invites us to experiment with new ways of being, even when those new ways feel threatening to the parts of us. But there is profound freedom in this work. When we understand the origins of our behaviors, when we see clearly how they once protected us, we gain the ability to choose. We are no longer driven unconsciously by old adaptations to situations that no longer exist. For those who have suffered too much, the journey toward wholeness often involves grief. We grieve not only for the suffering itself, but for the ways that suffering shaped us, for the experiences we missed, for the part of ourselves we had to abandon in order to survive. Allow yourself to feel this grief. It is appropriate, it is necessary, but know that grief is not the end of the story. Beyond grief lies the possibility of reclaiming aspects of yourself that were set aside during times of suffering. Perhaps you set aside trust in order to protect yourself from betrayal. Perhaps you set aside spontaneity to maintain control in a chaotic environment. Perhaps you set aside creativity because it made you too visible in a situation where visibility was dangerous. These abandoned aspects of self do not disappear entirely. They wait in the shadows of the psyche, ready to be integrated when conditions allow. The work of individuation involves creating those conditions, establishing enough internal safety that these exiled parts can return. This work happens gradually, in small steps, rather than dramatic transformations. You might experiment with trusting someone in a limited way. You might allow yourself a brief period of spontaneity. You might express creativity in a safe context. Each of these experiments provides information. Sometimes they confirm that old fears were justified, that more internal work is needed before significant change is possible. Other times they reveal that the world has changed, that you have changed, that what once was dangerous is now within your capacity to handle. This is the paradox at the heart of healing from profound suffering. We must honor the adaptations that helped us survive while gradually loosening the grip on our present life. We must acknowledge the reality of past danger while opening to the possibility of present safety. I want to be clear that this work is not about positive thinking or forcing yourself to move on from suffering. It is about developing a more complex relationship with your own history, one that includes both the reality of what happened to you and your remarkable capacity for growth and change. The behaviors we have discussed today are evidence of your psyche's creativity in the face of adversity. They demonstrate your fundamental will to survive, to make meaning, to maintain your humanity in inhuman circumstances. As you work to integrate these behaviors, to bring them into conscious relationship with your present life, remember that the goal is not to erase the evidence of your suffering. The goal is to transform your relationship with that suffering, to allow it to become part of your wisdom rather than the dominant force in your life. This transformation happens through awareness, through compassion for the parts of yourself shaped by suffering, through gradual experimentation with new ways of being. It happens through relationship with others who can witness your story without turning away. It happens through reconnection with the deeper currents of life that suffering may have temporarily obscured, but could never entirely eliminate. People who have suffered too much often develop a particular kind of wisdom, a depth of understanding that cannot be acquired any other way. This wisdom, when integrated rather than split off from the rest of the personality, our world needs people who have transformed their suffering into wisdom, who have walked through the fire and emerged not unscathed but more fully human. We need people who understand darkness from the inside, who can guide others through difficult terrain because they have traversed it themselves. If you recognize yourself in the behaviors we have discussed today, know that your suffering has not been meaningless. The ways you adapted to protect yourself were necessary and valuable. And now, having survived, you have the opportunity to integrate those adaptations into a larger, more flexible sense of who you are and what you might become. This is the promise of individuation, not that suffering will disappear, but that it will take its proper place in the larger story of your life, not as a defining feature, but as one thread in a complex tapestry that includes joy as well as sorrow, connection as well as autonomy. The work ahead is challenging, but profoundly worthwhile. It is nothing less than reclaiming the fullness of your humanity from the constraints imposed by suffering. It is about becoming not who you were before suffering, but who you are capable of being now. With all you have learned, with all you have endured, this becoming is not a solitary journey, though parts of it must be walked alone. Reach out to others who understand. Create community with those who can witness your truth without flinching. Remember that while your suffering may have been unique in its specifics, the human capacity for transformation is universal. You who have suffered too much have earned a particular kind of authority, the authority that comes from direct experience with life's most difficult realities. As you integrate the behaviors we have discussed today, that authority will find its proper expression in your life, in your relationships, in your contribution to our shared world. This is my message to you today. Your suffering has shaped you, but it does not define you. The behaviors you develop to survive are testament to your resilience, but they are not the final word on who you are or who you might become. The path of individuation lies open before you, challenging but ultimately liberating. I invite you to walk it with awareness, with courage, and with the deep knowledge that complete healing is possible.